Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to your questions on matters of economics, political philosophy, history, culture, current events, all those things that concern us in our effort to be good citizens.
All right, and here's a question about marriage and people on the left-right political spectrum. Typically, and that comes from Barry, typically people on the right or the libertarian tend to be in favor of the government getting out of just about everything, whereas people on the left are usually more fond of using the government, the power of the state, to regulate human affairs. And should marriage be in that same basket, if you will? Should people on the right, conservatives, libertarians, say, you know what, the state has no real business deciding what is or what is not a marriage, or should be or should not be, whereas the left-wingers tend to be more on the side of, yes, let's use the state to decide what should be a marriage, gay or none, same-sex or not?
That's an excellent question, and I think I have to begin here by invoking the world's smallest political quiz, enormously popular with libertarians and hence pretty much unknown to the
Is
rest
that
of the
why
world.
it's called the unknown? Yes.
Which suggests that instead of just measuring on the single dimension left-right spectrum, we need to examine people's attitude toward economic freedom on one axis and social freedom on the other. And according to the world's smallest political quiz, conservatives tend to favor a lot of economic freedom, but are more sympathetic to government intervention on social and cultural matters, whereas liberals tend to favor government intervention on economic matters, but not so much on social and cultural matters. And then you've got socialists or statists who want the government to intervene in everything, and then the libertarians who are at the virtuous peak of the thing as it
That's
is
us,
normally
right?
rotated in their displays, who want the government out of both. And I say that because I think, in fact, a lot of conservatives not only favor economic freedom, but have a great deal of support for social freedom in the sense that they think that institutions ought to arise organically from culture rather than being dictated by the state. And thus, a number of us anyway, and this does certainly put us closer to the libertarians on a lot of policy issues, would strongly defend, as we did in our Constitution project, the right of free association, that private clubs and entities, even if they're being obnoxious, provided they're not advocating or using force or fraud, should be free to experiment with behavior and to express ideas. But those of us who feel that way often say that it doesn't apply to marriage. And it doesn't apply to marriage not because of adults and what they might want to do, whether we approve of it or not, but because of children. Sir Henry Maine said that the progress essentially consisted of a move in societies from status to contract, from being born into a position and trapped in it, that your caste, you're a peasant, something like that, determines your prospects in life at the moment of birth, as opposed to one in which your talents determine and your desires and your energy determine what you can do. And so more and more we judge people by their conduct, not by who their parents were. But however completely we create a society based on status, we don't apply that rule to children because they are not yet of an age when they can fend for themselves and make mature and responsible judgments. Very few people, even on the extreme libertarian fringe, would deny that there are certain appropriate protections for people under the age of, let us say, 18, or sometimes they debate with the age of consent. Should it be 16? Should it even be 14? And people did used to get married at that age. And not just among the peasants, among the nobility. However that may be, nobody really thinks that 6-year-olds should be driving a car or voting or owning firearms or any of that kind of thing.
Certainly not mine, yeah.
And so the point of having a state interest in marriage, Robert Louis Stevenson once defined marriage as a friendship that is of interest to the police. And I think what you need to do in order to understand why marriage should be a legal institution and there should be government rules around it is to ask, why would the state be interested in one kind of friendship and not in all kinds of others? And the simple and correct answer to that is because when boy meets girl, children tend to result even if nobody intended that they should. And there need to be rules about who is responsible for those children's welfare. And even though, as you say, in a gay couple, you're very unlikely to have an unplanned pregnancy, nevertheless, if a gay couple adopts children, then those children are being placed in the care of adults, and the adults are contracting on their behalf. And you need rules for what the adults can and cannot do, and you need rules for what happens if the relationship should disintegrate. They cannot both walk away from the kids any more than in a heterosexual couple that's allowed. Now, obviously, through most of history, and all of it until the last decade and a half, marriage was an institution involving one man and one woman, or in some unfortunate parts of the world, polygamy. And the general feeling was it's the man who's likely to walk away and leave the woman holding the baby. She is most unlikely simply to dump the kid, and therefore you need legal rules that if a man abandons a woman, he's going to be tracked down and forced to support her in some way. So that was done not because she's got a broken heart. There's that old country song, she cried and the judge wiped her tears with my checkbook. But it's about the fact that as a rule, marriages produce children. And people, oh, there's some marriages where they don't have children, they can't have children, they don't want children, that sort of thing, sure. But as Richard Epstein says, you need simple rules for a complex world. Because the specific situations that people get into are so mind-bogglingly complex and sometimes extremely weird, you need a robust framework of rules that anybody can see how they're going to apply in the chaos that constitutes human existence. And for all those reasons, you do need the state to say, this person is married, this person is not married. And there are both privileges attaching to marriage, for instance, the old rule that, husband and wife cannot be compelled to testify against one another in court, but also obligations, that somebody's got to look after the kids, and that the partners have obligations to one another. And frankly, although I describe myself as libertarian on policy, I am conservative on metaphysics. I think that relaxing the rules around marriage, including no-fault divorce, that was an example of saying what adults need or want is what really matters. Kids are tough, they'll adapt. And that was a very cruel thing to do. We all seem to place a very high value on protecting the helpless and the innocent, and yet we have rearranged the rules around the relationship between the sexes in ways that leave children exposed to adult selfishness, to put the matter very bluntly. And we still have a court system that overwhelmingly, if a marriage does break down between a man and a woman, say, oh, well, we all know women are the nurturers, never mind all that talk about feminism. Of course, she gets the children. And we all know that men are providers, never mind all that talk about feminism. He's going to have to keep providing income. But whatever you think of the fairness of this, it does rely on an instinct that somebody's got to protect the children in the event that a relationship breaks down. And no matter how libertarian you are about adult relationships. And as I say, I'm very much on that side. I believe that heroin should be legal. I think if you get to the pearly gates and St. Peter says, did you ever take heroin? And you say, no, man, I couldn't score any. You've definitely given the wrong answer. But when it comes to the necessity that those people not yet able to be freely contracting responsible adults, they've got to be protected by the law. And a very conspicuous case of this is the children that result biologically or by adoption in a marriage. And that's why I also believe, to add a controversial note to what I'm sure so far has been entirely anodyne, the state needs to examine the question of marriage. Why does marriage exist? Who should be allowed to be married? What are the terms under which you should be allowed to get married or dissolve a marriage? Those should be judged not from the point of view of adult desires, emotional, sexual, material, or other, but on the basis of protection of the children who are not freely contracting parties. There's only so much the state can do, but it does need to do those things to ensure that children are not neglected or abused by adults in a relationship that satisfies the adults but doesn't protect the kids.
And the kids didn't pick to be in there, so they didn't choose their parents, right? Obviously,
whether
they need
they're,
to be protected.
again, biological or adoptive, children don't choose their parents. And society, through the state, must place obligations on parents and must enforce those obligations. And we should not rush into all kinds of forms of marriage because it's about love, man. It's about adult love if two people love one another. Marriage isn't about love. It's about an environment in which children are very likely to be reared and making sure that environment protects the people who cannot protect themselves.
All right, then. Thanks for that. Folks, if you would like to play along and ask your question, the URL on the screen will take you to a page where everything is explained. Thanks, and see you next time.